Today we're going to talk about the teacher shortage in California and present some data related to that, and then Leib's going to do that, and then Jesse's going to talk a little bit about some of the national data. And as the day progresses, these first two panels will be focused on what we know about the data, and then there's followed by two panels about some potential solutions in the arena of teacher preparation as well as support for existing teachers. I just wanted to start by noting that we have been here before in the late 90s after class size reduction, some significant increases, about 20% in enrollment during the decade of the 90s, and an upturn in retirements. We ended up by 2000, 2001 with over 42,000 teachers, which is about 14.5% of the workforce underprepared, that is, entering the classroom without having finished their preparation. And those teachers were quite unevenly distributed across the state. If you were a student in a high poverty, high minority school, you had 4 to 5 times the greater likelihood of actually having an underprepared teacher than if you were in a more advantaged school. So, as we look at the numbers today, which are not that dramatic yet, we want to think back to what we learned from those experiences back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Well, the first one was that we shouldn't shoot for short-term solutions, just get, as David said earlier, warm bodies into the classroom. We did that very quickly. 50% of all new hires at the beginning of the 2000s were underprepared, and they very quickly left the classroom because they weren't able to handle the work without any preparation. The second is to then focus on quality, and CSU, the CTC, and the state in general has really been, over the last decade, really pushing quality. And we want to, as David said again, we want to make sure that we stay on track with that with any solutions. The third is to think systemically in terms of any solutions. And I just want to point out that there were a number of really inventive and strong steps taken in the late 90s and early 2000s. They include, many of you know, these are, you don't have to read them all, but the TRIP program, Cal State Teach, the Apple Loan programs, okay? These were system-wide. They weren't sort of just, in one district, et cetera. These were system-wide efforts to stem the teacher shortage, which had a real impact. And so as we think about what to do next, let's keep in mind what we learned from past experiences. And then the final lesson was to pay attention to the data. We were somewhat caught surprised in 97, 98 when the problem first arose. And one thing we learned over the years was to every year redo our data, redo the analyses, and pay attention to it. And so that's what we're going to turn to now, what we know about the current status of the workforce. And I'm going to turn to my colleague, Leib Sutcher.
So as I'm sure you're all aware, there's been lots of press on teacher shortages in California. This is a quote from a Bay Area story. Just 10 days before the start of school, on August 24th, Oakland schools needed 77 teachers, and barring a miracle, will have many unfilled positions as students arrive. And here's one from San Diego. With 1,000 teachers eligible to retire this year, the district is bracing for an onslaught of openings. These and many more articles are providing anecdotal evidence, that California is in a teacher shortage. But we need more information to understand the prevalence of these shortages and to understand the severity. So to investigate the teacher labor market, we looked to supply and demand. Demand is the number of new teachers needed each year, and supply is how many qualified teachers, key on quality, that are available to fill those positions. If there's more demand than supply, then we're in a teacher shortage. Today we're going to share with you what we've been learning in California. So over the last 15 years, fewer and fewer young people are choosing to enter teaching. In this graph, each bar represents the total California teacher preparation program enrollment. In the early 2000s, enrollment was close to 80,000 candidates. By 2013, enrollment dipped to below 20,000, a decrease of over 70%. With the drop in demand brought on by the recession, At the time, this dive in enrollments was no reason for alarm. However, estimated hires are rapidly rising. Now that districts have more resources, they're looking to lower student-teacher ratios and reinstate programs that were reduced or eliminated during the Great Recession. So in this figure, you can see trends in teacher credentials issued in red and district estimated hires in blue. After hires declined through the recession, recently in the last 4 years, estimated hires have doubled, all while the number of teaching credentials have remained at all-time lows. If these trends continue, the gap will only widen. This figure shows a concerning picture, but we need more information to understand the full extent of the teacher shortage. So one way to further investigate the shortage is looking at the prevalence of underprepared teachers, or substandard credentials. When a district can't find a fully credentialed teacher, they can receive an exemption to hire an underprepared teacher to fill that position. This could be a government or history teacher teaching geometry or algebra classes, or an elementary school teacher who has not completed a teacher preparation program and has never taken a child development course. The prevalence of these substandard credentials signals that schools are struggling to find qualified teachers. In all, the number of teachers entering on these substandard credentials have increased by 63% in the last 3 years. So these sections outlined in red in the middle represent the largest of these increases. These credentials have tripled from nearly 850 to more than 2,400. This is particularly concerning because these are the teachers who lack both subject matter competency and full preparation for their subject area or grade level. These specific credentials can only be issued to fill immediate and acute staffing needs when a fully prepared teacher can't be found, essentially the reincarnation of California's emergency credential. The substandard credentials that are growing the fastest are the ones issued to the least prepared teachers, so a particularly concerning trend. So as we saw in last graph, the raw number of substandard credentials are increasing, but what percent of California's total teacher preparation does this make up? So looking at the gray slice, in 2013, over a quarter of all new credentials and permits were substandard. In 2014, this increased further to 35%. 1 in 3 new credentials and permits were substandard. And by 2015, the most recent data available, more than 40% of new credentials and permits were issued to underprepared teachers. So, the first step is to look at these statewide indicators, but it is equally important to understand the specific imbalances at the subject level and by location. It's worth noting that California has seen a slight bump in credentials and UC and CSU enrollments, a positive trend, but it's not been enough to keep up with demand, and these new candidates aren't choosing the shortage areas where we need them the most. California recently reported to the Department of Education that almost all of its subjects are now shortage areas. These shortages are particularly severe in math, science, and special education. The severity is evident in the credentialing patterns. So in math, full credentials, prepared teachers are declining, as substandard credentials, underprepared teachers are increasing. The same is true in science. Full credentials are down, while substandard credentials are up. There's a very similar story in special education. The overall number of special education teachers being prepared has decreased in the last 3 years, denoted by the shrinking size of the pie. But even more concerning, a greater and greater share of those special education, the California special education teachers being prepared, are underprepared for the classroom. By 2013-14, the split between prepared and underprepared special education teachers is close to 50-50. In special education, like in math and science, the pool of teachers being prepared is shrinking each year, and a larger and larger share of those teachers are underprepared for the classroom. So, there's a mismatch between supply and demand and this prevalence of underprepared teachers in the classroom, providing strong evidence of a teacher shortage in California. But to what extent is the teacher shortage here to stay? We argue that it is here to stay if we don't do anything about it. There are many indications in the data regarding retirements, beginning teacher attrition, and for some counties, student enrollment growth that point to a persisting and increasing shortage. A particularly influential factor we want to highlight is student-teacher ratios. So throughout the 2000s, California had one of the largest student-teacher ratios of any state in the country at 21 to 1. This is compared to the national average of 16 to 1. During the recession, budget cuts led schools to freeze hiring, which ballooned student-teacher ratios. In 2010, California's student-teacher ratio bounced up to 24 to 1 and has stayed there ever since. This student-teacher ratio increase was not a decision made by policymakers to benefit students, but was due to economic realities. And now that districts have more resources to hire again, parents and teachers are pushing schools to return to more reasonable class sizes. So, if California wanted to return to pre-recession class sizes, they would need to hire 60,000 additional teachers on top of their typical hiring to return to this 21 to 1 ratio. 60,000 teachers cannot just come in one year, but will require a sustained and elevated demand for multiple years. To put this in a national perspective, if California wanted to return to the 16 to 1 national average, they'd need to hire a total of 135,000 teachers to bring their student-teacher ratio down. Another factor we want to highlight is retirements. This graphic overlays the teacher age distribution today versus the teacher age distribution a decade ago. Today, 1 in 10 teachers are 60 and older. This is a significant increase from 10 years ago. And in all, more than a third of our teachers are 50 and older. Although the large peak of baby boomer retirements is past, there's still retirements on the horizon, which in times of shortage will have a particularly big impact on certain districts. So, what does this all mean at the local level? We're going to take a look right here in Sacramento and see how this picture plays out. So in Sacramento City School District, the demand for 2015-16 was 190 teachers, their estimated demand. And based on their proportion of the statewide supply, they'd only have 155 qualified teachers, clearly short of their demand, of their hiring needs. So the following year, we can assume that they'd need the same 190 hires. However, on top of typical hiring, if they wanted just to move a quarter of the way back to their pre-recession student-teacher ratios, they'd need to hire 80 teachers. To absorb enrollment growth between 2015-16 and 16-17, they'd need 16 more teachers. And because of the changing age distribution, they'd need 14 additional teachers to replace these retirements. So in all, this is an increase of 40% in their hiring needs, and now demand clearly towers over their supply of teachers. This is just one example. This is not an unfamiliar picture in many districts across the state. And we know that each district feels the shortage slightly differently. Some districts the largest demand increase will be student-teacher ratio reduction, some will be enrollment growth, others retirements. And so each county feels the shortage differently. And so what about your county? This is a preview of an interactive map we've created to help students, parents, districts, and state officials learn more about their own county's teacher shortage indicators. So on this map, which is on the website, the Learning Policy Institute website, you can use the drop-down menu above the map of California to select different teacher shortage indicators, such as enrollment growth or the percent of your teachers on substandard credentials. And you can hover your mouse over the map to compare different counties to themselves and the state average. And then clicking in on a county will provide a deeper analysis. So you can investigate your own county's teacher shortage indicators. Thanks so much, and I'm going to pass you off to Jesse, who's going to put it in a little bit of a national perspective.